Now, when I got started with no code, I initially started using Firebase as my backend. But ever since I discovered Supabase, I immediately realized that Supabase is the perfect backend for any of your apps, whether they're no code apps or regular apps. And so in today's video, I'm going to be telling you my reasons why I will always choose Supabase for any kind of app that I'm going to be building, whether there's going to be a relatively simple app or a much more complex app. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I mentioned in this video are going to be available on my Patreon page. And if you're still not a member of our amazing, rapidly growing Patreon community, then you can learn more about becoming a member in the description below the video. Now, the first reason that I feel why Supabase is absolutely perfect for all kinds of apps that you're going to be building in the future or you're thinking about building in the future is actually the reason that got me excited about using Supabase in my projects. And that is how easy it is to structure your database, your schema, your backend to reflect the needs of your apps. And this doesn't matter whether you have a relatively simple app or especially more complex apps, which is really going to be the case if you're planning to build an app and sell the app and you want the app to become popular. And so one of the apps that I have here was an app that I built a couple of weeks ago. And this is a relatively complex app, and this is an app for project tracking. Okay, so we have a project list, we have a task list, we have user authentication, we have user authorization, we have lots of moving pieces. And you may be thinking like, James, well, this is a relatively complex app, but in fact, this is a relatively simple complex app because chances are you're going to be building apps that are going to be a lot more complex than this. And while, building the actual app in Flutterflow, which is my favorite no-code builder, is relatively straightforward, it's also relatively straightforward to map out your entire backend schema, which is very, very important. So if you head over to my Supabase here, you can see that I have a bunch of tables, I have a bunch of views that perfectly represent the things that I want to happen in the app. You can build this app, but you still need to be able to store, and not only store, but also retrieve the data. You want to modify the data, you want to display the data. All of these things means that you need to set up the right schema. And if you check out here, you can see that we have a list of projects, we have a list of tasks, we have a list of roles, we have user roles, we have a special view. Here we have another view that enable us to get the data and display the data exactly how we want to display it. And as you can see here, I have relatively few tables and relatively few views, but the beautiful thing about it is that we can make it as complicated as we want. And so if you're going to be adding functionality to this specific app, or you're in the process of building another much more complex app, well, guess what? This schema here, this database backend, is going to grow along with your app, right? So if I'm going to be adding features to this app, I can easily create a new table. I can join it with existing tables. I can create the right view that's only going to be showing me the data that I need in that specific screen or in that specific situation. And that is why I chose Supabase for this specific app, and I did not regret it one bit. The next reason why Supabase is absolutely perfect for your no-code apps is because it's so simple and so straightforward to connect your apps to your database backend via their simple and easy to use API. And so once you've set up your schema and maybe you've even given it some simple data, the next thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be integrating Supabase with the app that you're building using a no-code builder such as Flutterflow. And fortunately, Supabase makes it super easy to connect the app that you're building to your backend. And the way that you can do it is you can simply click on API docs, and here you're going to see all the different ways that you can connect an external app to your Supabase backend. And so, for instance, if I select a table here, and it doesn't really matter whether this is a table or a view, it's all the same thing. In this right-hand pane, I'm going to be seeing the different operations that I can perform via my app that is connecting to my Supabase backend. And so when it comes to connecting your app to your Supabase backend, there are primarily two ways of doing it. You can do it using a native way here. In this case, this is JavaScript, but there are all kinds of different libraries for different platforms. So whether you're building a Flutter app, or you're building some kind of another app in a different language, you'll be able to do it as well. Another way is using Bash. And so if you click on Bash, you can essentially connect to your database backend using a REST API. And so if you're in a situation where you don't have native support, you don't have a native way to connect to your database backend, you'll always be able to connect it using a REST API, because regardless of what kind of app that you're building, what kind of platform that you're using, what kind of tool that you're using to build your app, chances are they're all going to support REST APIs. Now, when it comes to Flutterflow actually supports Supabase right out of the box. So if I search for Supabase here, I can click here. I can simply enable Supabase here and input my API URL and my anon key, and I can get all of that information by heading back to my Supabase, clicking on project settings, and clicking on API. Here's my project URL and my keys here. So all I need to do here is copy this here, paste it here, then copy this here and paste it there, then click on get schema, and that will allow me to get all the data, all the schema from my Supabase backend and use it in the app that I'm building here. And so regardless of whether you're using Flutterflow or you're using another no-code app builder, you should be able to relatively easily connect to your Supabase backend using the API that's best for your specific use case. Now, one of the mistakes that people make is they think that Supabase is just a database, okay? So they think that when they decide to use Supabase, they're only going to be using it for setting up their schemas, loading their data, and doing all kinds of manipulations with that data, displaying that data, deleting the data, updating the data, and all that. But that cannot be further from the truth. The fact of the matter is the database is actually one of the many components that comes bundled with Supabase. And so if you head over here to this menu, you can see that yes, we have the table editor, we have a SQL editor, yes, we have a database, but we also have things like authentication, storage, edge functions, and real time. And this is awesome because chances are if you're going to be building an app, you need to lock that app and only allow certain people in, and you need to know who is the currently logged in person so that you can show different things based on who is currently logged in. Your app might also be dealing with user generated storage. Maybe you're building a Twitter clone or a Facebook clone or another social media app. Well, in that case, your users are going to be uploading and sharing all kinds of media, maybe images, maybe videos, maybe audio files, right? Things besides just text. And because we're dealing with media, you can't store that directly in your database, right? You need another way to store it. Well, thankfully, Supabase has storage as well that makes it super easy to get started. And you also have various permissions on the storage that's going to allow you to create the right security policies. Next, we have edge functions, which allow you to create a piece of code that will be executed on Supabase's own super fast cloud network, followed by real time, another very, very crucial component that allows you to build all kinds of apps that need to be notified when something happens. And a perfect example of that would be a chat app. Maybe you have a group where somebody writes a message and all the users need to be notified that somebody wrote a message in the group. And this is where Supabase real-time functionality would certainly come in handy, because you can create listeners that will get notified when something happens, and you can display this information to your users as it happens without any noticeable delay. Now, the ability to authenticate your users is very, very important. But what might be even more important is creating authorization policies, okay? Because you see, it's one thing to know who is logged in, but it's another to conditionally allow different operations based on the users, or even more importantly, based on the groups or roles that those users are in. And so, for instance, if you're building an app, you might have admins, you may have moderators, you may have regular logged in users, or you might have guest accounts. And each of those user types should be able to support different operations. So admins should be able to do everything and anything. Moderators should be able to do a lot of things, but less than admins, but still more than users, where users should be able to do standard things. And maybe guest accounts shouldn't be able to do anything at all except view certain parts of the app. And fortunately, this is where Supabase has got your back as well, because you can create user roles authorization policies based on role level security. As you can see in this app, I have a very, very simple table here called user roles. And here is where I'm essentially assigning different users to different roles. So as you can see, I have 3 of these users assigned to this role here. This is the admin role. And then I have 2 of these users assigned to this next role here. And this is the moderator role. And once I've set up this very, very simple relationship here, specifying different users that are going to be in different roles, I can then configure different tables to only show the data based on the specific role that the logged in user belongs to. So as an example, let's say we come into this project users. And project users is a type of table that represents certain data that should only be available to certain users. And if you click here, you can see that I have these auth policies. And here I have specified that deletion should be only done by admin. Insertion should be only done by admin. But when it comes to reading, then it's fair game for everybody. Essentially, everybody will be able to read this data, but they will not be able to modify it. And once I've created these policies, that means that users that are not part of the right role won't be able to perform that specific operation. And then I can also make the appropriate changes in my app as well to ensure that, for instance, if a user cannot delete anybody, they will not see the option to delete. If a user cannot insert unless they're part of the admin role, then they're not going to see the insert button or the insert form. But on the other hand, when it comes to reading the data, because we have this policy set as wide open, we don't have to do anything on our front-end app. Another feature that I feel is highly underrated is the fact that you can get Supabase to do absolutely anything that you want with extensions. So if you click on this database here, you have this extension option here. So if you click on extensions, you can see all the extensions that I have enabled. But if you scroll down, you can see all the available extensions that I have at my disposal. So if I'm interested in using one of these extensions here, I can simply enable it and it's going to appear here. Now you may be thinking, what exactly are extensions? What do extensions do? Well, let me show you a really simple use case. So if I go to one of my tables here, and let's say I have a table here called users extension, which is an extension of the built-in users table, allowing me to attach additional data to each user that I can't really do with that original users table. Well, as you can see here, I have a bunch of fields. So I have the profile URL, which is text. I have the subscription start, which is a timestamp. I have the subscription end, which is a timestamp, and I have the email, which is text. Now, you may have noticed that these are relatively simple and self-explanatory fields, right? I have this text here, I have timestamp, and I have text. But what if I wanted to create a field that did something special? As an example, let's say I had a field called city, where we were storing the city where the user lives. Well, because we have that field that stores the user's location, I can create another field that will pull in the coordinates. Okay, so one field can be storing the city, and another field can use a custom extension or a built-in extension to automatically look up the coordinates of another field. And so essentially, when you're thinking about extensions or plugins, you are enabling custom features, custom functionality to do pretty much anything that you want. And so if I have a field here called city, I can have another field that gets the coordinates from this field here. And this means that as I'm adding more and more users, that other field is going to automatically calculate the coordinates, okay? And typically something like this you would need to do in your app, right? If you ever want to do some kind of custom code, you want to do a calculation, you want to do something that's beyond a simple text field or a simple number field, typically, traditionally, you would need to do it inside of your app. And so whether you're building a Flutterflow app or some other app, you're going to have a situation where anytime you're adding a new user, you would need to write the code to calculate that automatically. Well, with extensions, you no longer need to do that, right? Because extensions give you this code for free, right? So if you go back to this extensions here, this database, and you click on extensions, you can kind of browse and see the different extensions that give you essentially free code, that give you code that you do not need to write. So as an example, here we have an HTTP extension. So this will allow you to create a field that will browse the internet. Okay, so you can specify, well, I want to access this URL and I want to capture this piece of data. And you can do all of that inside of Supabase. You don't need to write an app. You don't need to write a separate script to do that. All of that can be done automatically with this very, very simple extension. And there's lots of different extensions that do all kinds of things depending on your specific use case. So definitely check out the different extensions before you decide to write the code yourself, whether as a separate script or as part of your app logic. Last but not least, and probably a reason that a lot of you would definitely appreciate, is the fact that Supabase is absolutely free. Supabase is an open source project. You can simply click here and you're going to be redirected to Supabase's GitHub repository, where you can browse all the code to your heart's content. You can see how it is built. But another thing that you can do is you can simply click on Docs here and you can scroll down and you can self-host. So you do not need to sign up for an account. You do not need to pay a fee. You do not need to elect a plan. If you want, you have an option of self-hosting. So you can simply click here, and here you have two officially supported options when it comes to self-hosting Supabase. You can use Docker, which makes it super easy to package up any piece of software and simply run it on a cloud or one of these other platforms that deploy these Docker packages for you, such as Railway. Or another option that you have at your disposal is BYO Cloud, which means bring your own cloud, which means that you have the option of self-hosting Supabase anywhere that you want. And so the choice is really up to you. But I will say that unless you have a really, really good reason to self-host Supabase, I would highly recommend to get started with a free Supabase.com account. This video is not sponsored by Supabase at all, but that is the path that I would recommend for people getting started with Supabase. And later on, if you decide that you don't want to use Supabase or Supabase.com, you want to self-host it, you want to tinker with it, you want to customize it, you want to change some things around maybe, then in that case, I would look into self-hosting. But still, an important element here is that you always have the option of self-hosting it if you so desire, which is definitely not the case when it comes to a lot of these proprietary database backends where you do not have an option to see the code or to self-host the product. And obviously, there are many, many more reasons when it comes to choosing Supabase as your backend of choice, whether you're building relatively simple apps or very, very complex production ready apps. Personally, I feel super confident in Supabase to accommodate just about any kind of app that I'm going to be building in the future. I feel that I'm going to be using Supabase and it's going to work out perfectly in the end. And I feel the same when it comes to your apps as well, whether you're going to be building simple apps or very complex apps with lots of tables, lots of views, lots of different relationships. I feel that Supabase is going to be the ideal backend in those situations as well. Now, if you guys are interested in understanding how to use Supabase when it comes to real world production ready complex apps, then you guys definitely need to check out our Patreon page. Because when you check out our Patreon page, you're going to get access to all the complex apps that I've built with Supabase. And that way you can see firsthand how to design and build and launch an app with Supabase firsthand. And I have all kinds of apps on that Patreon page. So if I built an app on this channel, you'll be able to view and or clone that app via the Patreon community, which means that if I covered an app on this channel, whether it's a simple or a much more complex app, well, guess what? That app is going to be available to view and or clone via our Patreon page. And at this point, I have something like over 150 apps or 160 plus apps available, and I've built all kinds of apps, very, very simple apps, fairly complex apps, and pretty much anything in between in all kinds of niches that do all kinds of things. So regardless what kind of app that you're looking to build, in what kind of niche, for what kind of audience, chances are you're going to find something helpful, something that's going to help you reach your goal by browsing our extensive app collection via the Patreon community. And that's not all. When you join our amazing Patreon community, you're also going to get access to extra content. So you're going to get access to things like Q&As. You're going to get access to behind the scenes content. You're going to get access to live streams. And you're also going to get access to our Patreon supported masterclass series where I do deep dives of various concepts, various app builders, various tools that I find interesting and our Patreon community wants to learn more about. And in fact, in the near future, I plan to do another amazing deep dive masterclass talking about some very, very important concepts that all of you will definitely find interesting. And above all, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work. And that is greatly, greatly appreciated. And so if you're looking to take your no-code knowledge to the next level, you're looking to build an amazing app, you're looking to launch an amazing app, maybe build a software company or do freelancing or helping clients, then you're going to get a ton of value on our Patreon community. And you can learn more about it and hopefully join via the link in the description below the video.